three things to talk about this week. Firstly, we're going to discuss US CPI. Then we're going to talk about Japanese bonds. And then finally, we're going to discuss or do a deep dive into Eskom and state collapse in South Africa. Okay. Starting off with US CPI. US CPI came in as expected at about 6.5%, continue to show that decline that we've been seeing for a while. A number of factors are working in the favor, not just energy prices coming down, but also things like, for instance, housing costs are also under pressure. Supply chains have been eased significantly. So overall, we are seeing, prices under pressure in the US. We've also seen, for instance, the Germans come out and say that they expect their inflation to have peaked as well, which is obviously a big positive for the Eurozone. Like I mentioned a couple of times before, very warm weather in Europe has been very positive for, energy prices. It's meant that as the price of energy, as demand is lower because weather is warm, you don't need as much energy to, heat your home and so on. That has taken away a lot of pressure on the system, and it's been an incredibly lucky period. I mean, if we had a below average temperature, not even significantly below, just slightly below average temperature for Europe over this winter, they'd be in a far worse situation. On the other hand, they've actually had record high temperatures, significantly above the average. So they've been very fortunate this period. As a note, as part of this whole weather situation, apparently Russia's having a very cold winter. Parts of Siberia are hitting record lows. Global warming is not just global warming, it's global change, global uncertainty, variation. And so if one area gets warmer, likely one area gets cooler as well. So CPI numbers coming very good in the US. What does this mean? Well, it means that the number of rate hikes is probably going to be reduced a little bit. I know the Fed is talking about, hiking, significantly this year, and not even thinking about cutting until next year. But I think the market assumption at the moment is maybe one or two more hikes this year, and then cutting by December. That is the market kind of prediction at the moment. Okay, moving on. Japanese bonds. We are starting to see more pressure in the Japanese bond market. We've seen in another, slight loss of control by the central bank. And for those that don't know, the problem in Japan is as follows. They've borrowed more money than anybody else in the world compared to the GDP. They are in a declining, demographic situation. So what's happened is they don't have enough kids. The number of people is declining, and even though the population has declined significantly, the working age population has. So what's happened is because they're not enough kids, this was a problem decades ago. They never had people to replace the people that were retiring. Now Japan has a very long-lived population, so the population number still looks quite good, but a lot of that population are elderly people. I think the stat is Japan sells more adult diapers than they do baby diapers. Adult nappies than baby nappies, showing the kind of imbalance in that economy. And so even the population hasn't fallen, the working age population has fallen. Japan also has quite a, let us say, not a very progressive, attitude towards women in the workforce. They don't really have as many women in the workforce as you see a similarly developed country have in Western Europe or North America. So yes, what we've seen is the number of people working in Japan available to work is under pressure. That means they can't grow that fast. It's basically how much each worker produces times the number of workers. Productivity of worker times the number of workers gives you kind of a GDP. Japan basically doesn't have that many workers as it once had, and the GDP is basically being under pressure. But they have this huge debt. Okay, now if you're growing very fast, you have a big debt, you can pay that off because you earn more money. It's like if you have a big debt as an individual, but you make a bigger salary over time, that doesn't matter. But if you have a big debt as an individual and your salary is falling, what's going to be happening? That debt is going to be an issue. And one of the things that's going to affect that debt is how you can service it, because remember, you have to pay interest. And so one of the benefits of Japan's zero interest policy effectively has been that they don't pay that much interest payments on their debt, meaning it's reasonably easy to have the biggest debt in the world versus your GDP rather. And what's happened is inflation has hit up elsewhere in the world and interest rates have risen. What we have seen is that Japan is unable to follow that. They've done tiny moves, but they are not anywhere near where, for instance, the US is, and even Europe. It's not following the US as strongly, but they're not even following what Europe is doing because they can't. If they raise interest rates, they've got to service that debt. It's going to cause a huge budget issue, and that's going to cause a problem. And we started to see the market kind of revolt against that. So Last year we had the yen weaken significantly. It's a little stronger now, about 130 some change. But I do suspect that we might see the yen break 145 and 150 this year as this problem becomes a bigger and bigger issue. And by the way, just so you know, this was one of the questions in our webinar questionnaire predicting what's going to happen in 2023. And finally, we're going to do a deep dive into Eskom and why this is a problem and what's happening right now. A recent report from the World Economic Forum surveyed executives around the world. I think it surveyed like 15,000 different executives, people of reasonable power in the commercial sphere, etc. And South Africa, Peru, and Croatia, but Bosnia. So Peru, Bosnia, and South Africa stood out. Why? Because they had state collapse as the number one issue. The fear of state collapse. So we talked about the actual state, not functioning. Let's take an idea of how bad that the thing is. Bosnia had a literal genocide, a few decades ago. It's a really, really, messed up situation in Bosnia. They've had, very difficult political situation. It's been a problem. Peru, I think, had the last 6 presidents arrested or killed or committed suicide. A whole bunch of stuff been happening in Peru. Their political situation has been a disaster for many, many years. And then in South Africa, which is apparently in the same situation, despite the fact we have not had a genocide or political issues on that level. We obviously had the Zuma situation, but compared to what's happening in Peru, we were pretty okay. The fact of the matter is that institutional capacity of the South African state has fallen. We've seen that everywhere from Eskom to the beaches of Durban to the riots that happened coincidentally in Durban as well. We've seen water issues around the country. The rail issue with Transnet is in a real bad patch. So we've seen various state-run enterprises in South Africa, state-run services like policing, etc., decreasing in quality, increasing capacity over the last little while. Now, with Eskom, as I speak to you, we're in load shedding level 6. Just yesterday, I personally had no internet for much of the day. So it's getting to a point where the problems in electricity is causing problems in the internet. It'll be causing problems in water because the reservoirs are not functioning properly because they're not getting the power they need to basically pump water as much as they need to. And as Eskom basically seems to not be stopping its decline, let alone reversing it, these problems are going to continue into the future. Now, my thesis around this is as follows. I don't think that, some of the doomsayers about the economy collapsing are quite right in that. The reason being is that there's several countries in the world, maybe not developed countries, but there's several countries that function reasonably well, even with very uncertain electricity production. What happens is businesses and individuals adapt. In South Africa, we have quite a bit of money, certainly certain businesses do, and it's quite possible to get solar or other forms of generation of power into your business to prevent you from being basically held hostage to Eskom's issues. And I think that's going to be happening. I've seen a number of clients who've got businesses or entrepreneurs, and if they make enough money in their business, they generally are thinking of getting solar or getting some other form of personal or private power production. And the great thing is that with the drive for renewables and other things over the last couple of decades, the prices have never been lower. So the price of getting solar panels, getting a battery and an inverter and so on, is coming into the reach of a lot of people. Well, not the majority by any means, but a lot of people. What these people tend to have in common, and these companies tend to have in common, is they pay their bills. These are the upper ends of the country in terms of income levels, so they are more likely to pay than not. Eskom is going to be losing these people as customers, these businesses as customers, at least to a partial extent. There's been discussions about what can you do about the fact that wealthy people are not going to be taking as much electricity from Eskom because they have their own generation. And we've seen things, for instance, like the possibility of having a connection tariff where you pay 1,000 rands a month for just being connected to Eskom, even though you may not take as much power as you once did. All that's going to do is drive you to be totally off grid. And what do you do then? Do you put a tax on solar? Do you put a tax on batteries? What's the end game for government as these people that pay their bills exit the system? At the same time, there's talk of yet another bailout for Soweto. effectively not debt forgiveness. I think it'll be the fourth or fifth one, or maybe even more than that. I've lost count, quite frankly. And these are multiple billions each time that Eskom just writes off that it's owed by President of Soweto. Those people are not going to leave. They're not going to get the solar power. They're not going to get things in general. And so you're going to find that Eskom's will be left with customers that don't pay and lose customers that do. What's going to be the situation around there? Possibly we do have an extra tax put in place by government. I mean, like they talk about a tax now to take care of the TV licenses, because people don't want to pay TV licenses anymore. But yet they're still watching Netflix and they're watching, other things, but they're not watching SABC. But yet they want to have a TV license tax effectively in place. I think something similar might be discussed around Eskom. There might be taxes, for instance, on, like I said, on the solar panel. So even if you're not connected to the grid, you'd have no connection to Eskom whatsoever. They'll just say, hey, we want the money, you would have paid us anyway. Like, even though we're not reliant on us for electricity, don't take our electricity, we want that money anyway. That might be the situation that happens there. And, just speaking of money, Eskom just got an 18.6% or 65% increase by NERSA. This is after multiple increases. To give you an idea how bad it's been. So in 2007 to 2019, I believe, Eskom's prices increased over 440%. It was a huge, like 4 times that. And we've had multiple, double-digit increases since then, So I wouldn't be surprised if we've had a multiple increase in terms of basically a multiplier of 2019 prices almost by now. Okay, so we are seeing more and more costs coming through from Eskom's side, because they're desperate to basically function. And remember, the advantage of big power provider like Eskom has is basically it's efficient. It's able to use huge amounts of energy to produce huge amounts of electricity, and because they're so big, they can do it efficiently. However, because of all the issues they're having, they've often had to resort to very inefficient means of production. For instance, using diesel to run generators. Yes, their diesel generators will be cheaper than your diesel generators, but it's still much more expensive than the normal things like the coal-fired power plants or the other things that they would normally be using. And that means that Eskom's prices, the cost of what they're doing, is rising. And at the same time, also, Eskom's infrastructure is so decayed that the capacity of its infrastructure to operate at its maximum has been reduced over time. So every year, we've seen the capacity, so instance, something is operated at 1,000 megawatts, might actually be able to operate in reality at 500, and we expect next year to be 490 or 480. That's the kind of decline that's happening there. And if you have the same infrastructure, the same effort put into place, but the amount of output is basically going to be lower, the cost per unit of output is effectively obviously going to be higher. So we are seeing all these kind of factors coming into play around Eskom right now. And like I said, this is not the only issue we have right now with regards to infrastructure in Africa. We have an issue with transport, which is an important factor, because without transport, how do we get the stuff we export from the mines and from like farms and so on to international markets? We just can't. It's much more difficult. You use the trucks. You could drive the roads. Have you driven the roads recently? It's obviously going to be a problem. And like I said, the stuff like, for instance, policing has also been on decline. What is the solution to this? I don't know. But it is something to be concerned about, I think, at the moment. What you would do in a situation like that, you'd be wanting to diversify your assets. Want to have some kind of hedge against the prospect of a further decline in state power in South Africa, which means offshore. Just that's as simple as that. Offshore into, for instance, dollars, or into an offshore account with then invest in offshore assets, shares and whatnot. Preferably directly offshore. If you are going to be in a collapsing state and you are via, for instance, the local banking system or having an account for the local institution, unfortunately, history has shown that when these things do occur, we do have a thing like Sri Lanka occur, or collapse like we had multiple times in Argentina. You do find that the state is not as as diligent as it should be about private ownership. If it needs money, your money might be the money it needs. So just be aware of that. Okay, that's me for this week. Thanks for joining me.